In a media landscape dominated by talk shows and celebrity gossip, one moment has shaken the very foundation of how we view responsibility, truth, and accountability in the entertainment industry. Whoopi Goldberg, a respected figure on The View, has found herself at the center of a storm she never expected. With her controversial remarks drawing criticism, the very platform she stood on now threatens to crumble under the weight of her own words. But it's not just Whoopi's career that's on the line. As the flames of this controversy intensify, a rising star, Karoline Leavitt, steps into the spotlight, challenging the very system that once worked to silence voices like hers. What unfolds next is nothing short of a cultural reckoning, a battle between media giants and a young woman with nothing to lose but the truth. The triggering moment, Whoopi's words and Karoline's rise. It all began with Whoopi's words, casually uttered yet loaded with implications. Her comments didn't just spark outrage. They ignited a firestorm that spread across the nation. Viewers from all walks of life, especially those who have long felt marginalized by The View's often liberal slant, were enraged. It was no longer just about one celebrity's opinion. It became a symbol of the broader divide between the media elites and the American public. As the media scrambled to downplay the fallout, a new voice emerged, Karoline Leavitt. A conservative firebrand, she refused to remain silent. Unlike others who would have simply fallen back into the shadows of media smears, Karoline took a stand. She filed a lawsuit that would not only challenge the actions of Whoopi Goldberg, but also expose the hypocrisy of a media ecosystem that prides itself on virtue while silencing dissent. Behind closed doors at ABC, the panic was palpable. Whoopi's comments had sparked more than just a backlash. They had forced the network to confront its own role in shaping public discourse. Internal meetings were underway, with executives drafting plans to manage the fallout. The strategy was clear: distance the brand from the controversy while slowly preparing to part ways with Whoopi in a way that wouldn't damage their reputation. But here's the twist: Karoline Leavitt wasn't backing down. She was not just taking the high road. She was taking the courtroom, armed with a binder full of evidence that would tear down the narrative that The View had so carefully constructed. As Whoopi's words echoed in the media, Karoline's calm, poised demeanor in court captivated the public. It wasn't her loud protests that caught the world's attention. It was her steadfast resolve to fight back with facts. Her legal team knew this wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about changing the way the media treated the people they attacked. What Karoline did next was nothing short of remarkable. She didn't engage in Twitter rants or public feuds. Instead, she let the facts do the talking. As hours of deposition and testimony played out in court, her approach became clear. There was no need for dramatic outbursts. Karoline's receipts, literal, time-stamped evidence, spoke for themselves. As commentators across the political spectrum watched, they couldn't help but acknowledge Karoline was doing this the right way. Tables turn. Karoline becomes the voice of accountability. As the legal proceedings continued, the narrative began to shift. No longer was Karoline a young conservative figure dismissed as too inexperienced or too right-wing to be taken seriously. She had proven herself as a formidable force in the courtroom, one whose words were measured, calculated, and grounded in undeniable truth. And it wasn't just the right-wing pundits praising her. Even voices from the liberal side of the aisle began to recognize the power of her approach. CNN's analysts, typically skeptical of conservative voices, couldn't deny the strategic brilliance of her courtroom performance. On social media, Karoline's popularity surged. Clips of her calm yet assertive demeanor went viral across platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and X, formerly Twitter. Hashtags like #ExposeTheReceipts, #MediaAccountability, and #NoRantsJustFacts began trending globally. Each viral post was a testament to the power of restraint, proving that you didn't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the most weight. Fallout, Whoopi's exit, and the cultural shift. As Karoline's star rose, ABC's handling of the situation began to unravel. Insiders within the network reported that discussions about Whoopi's departure were already underway. The plan, a health-related hiatus, followed by a scripted farewell announcement. The network feared that if they didn't act quickly, the entire brand could collapse under the pressure of the legal battle. But Karoline wasn't just a legal victory. She was a cultural force. The way she handled the smear campaign and the media attacks wasn't just about self-preservation. It was about challenging the legacy media system that had long operated unchecked. Behind the scenes, Celebrities who once saw Karoline as an outlier were quietly sending her messages of support. One A-list actress reportedly DM'd Karoline with a simple, yet powerful message. "You're braver than most of Hollywood combined." It was a recognition of what Karoline had done for free speech, for truth, and for holding powerful people accountable. And the public was listening. Petitions demanding accountability from networks like ABC grew to over 2 million signatures. People were no longer content to sit back and watch. They were taking action. They were demanding that media outlets that had long believed they were untouchable finally face consequences for their actions. What Karoline Leavitt achieved wasn't just a personal win. It was a win for everyone who had ever felt silenced by the media elite. For too long, networks like ABC, with shows like The View, had used their platform to bully, shame, and target those who dared to think differently. Karoline's lawsuit wasn't just a response to one personal attack. It was a challenge to a system that had for too long gone unchecked. And now, as the dust begins to settle, the question remains. Has Karoline Leavitt cracked open a legacy institution that has mocked the American people for decades? If this lawsuit sets a precedent, it won't just impact Whoopi Goldberg or The View. It could change the way every network, every producer, and every media personality operates. The cultural reckoning. What's next? For the first time in years, the power has shifted. The once untouchable media institutions are now facing a reckoning. The public is waking up to the reality that they have more power than they ever thought. It's not just about Whoopi Goldberg. It's about what happens when the truth is finally laid bare and when powerful people are held accountable for the words they speak on national television. So now it's your turn. What do you think? Should Whoopi Goldberg face the consequences of her actions on The View? Is it time for ABC to let her go? Or should they hold her accountable for what was said on their platform? Is Karoline Leavitt's stand in court a victory for the truth? Or did she go too far? More importantly, has Karoline done what so many others were afraid to do? Stand up to the media machine and say enough is enough? Has she started a movement that will forever change the way legacy media operates? This is bigger than just one lawsuit. It's about reshaping the media landscape and forcing networks to finally ask, what's our accountability? So drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every single one of them. Don't forget to smash that like button if you believe in holding the powerful accountable. Subscribe for more fearless commentary that the mainstream media won't dare to say out loud. Share this video with someone who still thinks shows like The View are just harmless fluff. What just happened wasn't fluff. It was a cultural reckoning. And it's only just begun. As Karoline Leavitt's lawsuit against ABC and Whoopi Goldberg continued to unfold in the courts, something profound was happening beyond the confines of the legal battle. What started as a simple response to a personal affront had quickly snowballed into a nationwide movement. It was a movement centered on accountability, transparency, and a deeper questioning of the media giants who had long stood at the top of the entertainment and political food chain. The media was watching. No, they were terrified. This wasn't just a conservative rebellion. This wasn't some lone voice railing against the liberal elite. This was a cultural revolution unfolding before their eyes, a shift that could not be ignored. The narratives that these networks had spent years carefully curating were beginning to crack, and Karoline was the one holding the hammer. It wasn't just about Whoopi Goldberg anymore. The focus of the nation's eyes was now firmly on the power structures that had allowed figures like her to dominate the media landscape with little fear of reprisal. It became clear, Karoline's lawsuit was challenging more than Whoopi's actions. It was challenging the very core of how media elites were allowed to manipulate public opinion with impunity. In boardrooms across the nation, executives were on edge. If Karoline could force a reckoning with ABC, what would stop other brave individuals from doing the same? What was the next domino to fall? The thought was enough to send chills down the spine of anyone within the media empire who had long believed they were untouchable. As the legal case progressed, so did the media frenzy. Whoopi Goldberg's name had become synonymous with controversy, and not in the way she had ever anticipated. Every news cycle seemed to feature a new angle of the ongoing lawsuit. First, it was the details of Karoline's legal filings, which were as thorough as they were damning. Then, it was Whoopi's increasingly strained responses on The View, where she would try to downplay the situation, but only seemed to dig herself further into a hole. Behind the scenes, Whoopi's personal struggles were becoming harder to ignore. Sources close to the comedian and actress revealed that the stress of the lawsuit was taking its toll. The woman who had once been known for her quick wit and sharp tongue now found herself questioning every word she said on national television. She could no longer rely on her usual banter to distract from the storm that was brewing. In private moments, Whoopi was said to have admitted to close friends that the weight of the situation had begun to feel unbearable. "I thought I could handle anything," she reportedly said, her voice thick with frustration. "But this is different. I'm being attacked in a way I never saw coming." For Whoopi, the public perception of her had shifted. The words that had once made her a beloved figure were now being scrutinized under a magnifying glass. And as much as she tried to maintain the persona of the tough, no-nonsense woman who could weather any storm, the cracks in that armor were becoming painfully visible. While the media tried to paint Karoline as the villain, those who had once admired Whoopi were now beginning to question their loyalty. Was she really the free-thinking, open-minded icon she had once seemed to be? Or had the years of unchallenged celebrity privilege made her blind to the consequences of her actions? Was she now just another casualty of the very system she had helped perpetuate? While Whoopi struggled in the spotlight, Karoline's rise continued unabated. Social media platforms, which had once been dominated by the voices of the mainstream media, now seemed to be completely at Karoline's disposal. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and X became her stage, and she used it with precision. Her videos and posts, often subtle yet powerful, began to resonate with millions of people who had grown tired of the constant barrage of media manipulation. The backlash against Whoopi wasn't just confined to conservative circles anymore. Karoline's unyielding stance against media hypocrisy had struck a chord across political divides. Even liberals who had once revered Whoopi for her activism now found themselves questioning the value of blind loyalty to a system that seemed to prioritize celebrity over truth. Karoline's calm, measured approach stood in stark contrast to the hysterical tone that had become all too familiar in modern political discourse. It wasn't just Karoline's legal case that was going viral. It was her broader message of accountability. Hashtags like #MediaExposed, #TruthMatters, and #CulturalReckoning continued to trend, flooding social media feeds with stories of ordinary people speaking out against the media's manipulation of truth. People from all walks of life were using their voices to demand a system that prioritized facts over fiction, truth over spin, and accountability over celebrity. It was clear that Karoline's influence was growing exponentially. She was no longer just a voice in a legal battle. She was becoming the voice of a new generation, one that wasn't afraid to challenge the powers that be, no matter how big or influential they were. The legal drama, Whoopi's defense unravels. In the courtroom, things weren't looking much better for Whoopi. The longer the case dragged on, the more holes were found in her defense. The legal team representing ABC tried to argue that Whoopi's comments were simply a case of misunderstood humor, a product of the often chaotic and unpredictable nature of live television. But Karoline's team was relentless, and the evidence they presented was devastating. Deposition after deposition, witness after witness, the case against Whoopi and ABC grew stronger. But perhaps the most damaging blow came when Karoline's legal team presented an audio recording from an ABC executive, which included a discussion of how to handle controversial statements made by the View hosts. The recording was damning. It revealed that ABC had not only been aware of the risks of Whoopi's remarks, but had actively worked to shield her from any real consequences. The media's portrayal of Whoopi as the victim began to crumble. The public began to realize that this wasn't about a simple misunderstanding. It was about a concerted effort by a major media corporation to protect one of its star personalities, even at the expense of truth and fairness. As the lawsuit drew to a close, it became increasingly clear that Karoline Leavitt had won, no matter the final verdict. Her message had resonated far beyond the walls of the courtroom. People across the nation were talking about media accountability in a way they never had before. The focus had shifted from Whoopi Goldberg's comments to the larger issue of how the media manipulates public perception and protects its most powerful figures. Karoline's victory was not just in the legal realm. It was cultural. It was a seismic shift in how Americans viewed the relationship between the media and the people. Karoline had become the face of that change, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt silenced or dismissed by the media machine. But the real question now was, what would happen next? If Karoline could expose the hypocrisy of one of the most influential media organizations in the world, what was stopping others from doing the same? What if this was just the beginning of a larger movement to hold the media accountable for the lies, the cover-ups, and the manipulation that had become so commonplace? As Karoline stood before the cameras in the final moments of the trial, her expression was calm. But beneath that calm exterior was a fierce determination. She knew this wasn't over. The battle she had started would have far-reaching consequences, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever questioned the power of the media. And as the cameras flashed, the message was clear. The cultural reckoning had only just begun. Are we really ready to hold the media accountable? Is this the beginning of a new era where the truth finally prevails over the manipulation? Or will the powerful forces behind networks like ABC find a way to fight back and silence those who dare to speak out? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This fight is far from over. And if you believe in the power of truth, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates on this groundbreaking case. As the dust began to settle from the courtroom, a new phase of the saga emerged. Karoline Leavitt had become something more than a simple plaintiff in a high-profile lawsuit. She had become a symbol of defiance against the powerful media empire that had long controlled narratives. But the battle was far from over. The courtroom was just one stage of a much larger war, one that would reshape the way media corporations operated, how the public viewed celebrities, and how powerful figures in the entertainment industry would approach accountability in the future. Media giants on edge, a reckoning brewing. The first signs of the ripple effect were subtle but telling. ABC, along with its parent company Disney, went into full damage control mode. Behind closed doors, corporate executives scrambled to formulate their next move. The legal team for ABC was already working on appealing the case, but they knew that even if they won, they had already lost something much larger: trust. The damage to ABC's brand was already profound. Sponsors began to hesitate, uncertain whether associating with the network in the wake of the scandal was worth the risk. Advertisers pulled back, nervous that they might alienate viewers who had been made aware of the network's inner workings. How executives had been complicit in fostering a culture where celebrities could act with impunity, where sensitive matters were often swept under the rug to protect reputations. The network tried to restore normalcy, but the cracks were too visible. Former allies of Whoopi Goldberg in the entertainment industry began to speak out, some claiming that they had known about the network's efforts to cover up various incidents over the years. The whispers became louder, and the trust that had once been implicit between networks, their stars, and the public was now shattered. People began questioning the legitimacy of everything. Were they really watching news? Or was it just a carefully crafted performance meant to sway their opinions? Were their favorite celebrities being presented as heroes, when behind the scenes they were nothing more than puppets of the media machine? Karoline's case had opened Pandora's box, and what had once been a safe haven for media giants was now a minefield of uncertainty. In the weeks following the public outcry, Karoline Leavitt's influence only grew. Her social media platforms exploded with new followers, many of whom had never heard of her before the lawsuit. The message she carried resonated with people across the political spectrum, with commentators and activists from various ideological backgrounds rallying behind her cause. What had initially seemed like a partisan issue had evolved into something much more significant: a universal struggle for truth and accountability in media. More surprising, however, were the allies who began to surface. Individuals from all walks of life who had once been on the other side of the political aisle, but now found themselves agreeing with Karoline's stance. Some high-profile liberal figures, who had spent years railing against conservative media outlets for their role in manipulating public perception, now stood side by side with Karoline. They argued that it wasn't about right versus left anymore. It was about holding power accountable. In Hollywood, a few disillusioned insiders began to speak out as well. Many actors and producers, once hesitant to criticize the system that had given them fame and fortune, were now willing to take a stand. They had witnessed firsthand the kind of behind-the-scenes manipulations that Karoline had exposed. Some began to see her not just as a whistleblower, but as a catalyst for a revolution within the entertainment industry. It wasn't just celebrities and pundits who came out in support. Grassroots activists, the kind of people who had been fighting for justice and equality long before Karoline entered the spotlight, joined forces with her. The rise of social media activism made it easier for voices that had long been silenced to rally behind a cause they believed in. It was no longer just Karoline taking on the media. Now it was an entire army of people fighting for transparency, truth, and a media that truly served the public. Whoopi's struggle, the unraveling of a legend. While Karoline's influence continued to grow, Whoopi Goldberg found herself in a spiral of isolation. The once popular TV personality had been pushed into a corner, her public image severely damaged by the very same system she had once thrived in. Every appearance she made was now met with scrutiny. People who had once loved her as the funny, outspoken voice of reason began to see her in a different light. She was no longer just Whoopi Goldberg. She had become the face of everything wrong with the media industry. In interviews, she tried to defend herself, but each attempt only seemed to make matters worse. She repeatedly stated that she had been misunderstood, that her words had been taken out of context. But those statements fell flat in a world where context was no longer enough. People were no longer willing to accept vague apologies or the promise of better behavior in the future. What had happened was too far-reaching, too damaging for that. Whoopi's personal life, too, became a topic of public interest. Sources close to her reported that she was struggling to deal with the emotional toll the situation had taken on her. Once known for her resilience, Whoopi now seemed to be fighting a war on multiple fronts: her personal reputation, her professional career, and perhaps most painfully, her relationship with her fans. There were whispers that she had considered stepping away from The View, but nothing concrete ever came of it. Instead, she appeared as a shadow of her former self, a broken icon who was unable to escape the consequences of her actions. Despite her best efforts to downplay the situation, the public perception of Whoopi continued to deteriorate. Her apologies seemed hollow to many, and the legal case continued to dominate headlines. Even her most ardent defenders were beginning to question whether they had been too quick to jump to her defense. The idea of a powerful celebrity being held accountable, something that had always seemed like an impossibility, was becoming a reality.